Welcome to week 3, everyone. I hope that you guys had a good weekend and are ready for the week ahead. There's a lot that will be facing us, but I hope that you guys are able to take it one step at a time. We've already gone through this in class, and so this might be a little bit of a repeat. You're more than welcome to just hang in there. But as you think about Crystal Knocked, I want to throw out this first starter activity to you again. What was it? Who was involved? What took place there with Crystal Knocked? Last week, we did a lot to establish Hitler coming to power. We saw a lot of different areas that he is going to now grab control over within the government. And as he becomes the main leader in Germany, you're going to see that now extending to a lot of different areas. I want to talk about two more today that he is going to grab control over. One of them is going to be the churches. Now, this is going to be across the board. It doesn't matter if it's Protestant or Catholic. Hitler is going to have quite a bit of say in how things are done and going to now coordinate, quote unquote, them so that they're not going to be a outspoken voice against him. They're not going to be somebody that would trip him up or encourage their followers to speak out or act out against him. There will be a number of pastors who use this moment to now almost being like a voice crying out in the wilderness, call out what they're seeing. One of the most famous that you guys maybe have heard this name before, but haven't put the pieces together, is a guy by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship, and one of the things that he did and that was most notable was him being involved in ultimately a plot to try to kill Hitler. Because of this and because the plot was found out, and again, this will be years down the road, he's a German pastor, but he is going to ultimately be executed in Germany right before the end of the war. But Hitler is going to do a lot to control the church. The other area that he's going to do a lot to control are going to be labor unions, the workforce, as he tries to now bring about his vision for Germany. One of the main things that you can't have happening while you're trying to build this new monstrosity is for workers to go on strike. You can't have them using their voice to now limit what effectiveness is there within the workforce. So he says there are no labor unions that are going to be free. They're all going to be controlled by the government, and basically all the things that had been up to these labor bosses was now going to be done away with, strikes being one of them. Ultimately, you're going to see a number of these huge public works projects. We won't get into them, but if you want to do a little bit of digging or research, you could definitely see some of the huge buildings that were going to come about, even including the Olympics that were going to be hosted by Germany, building up for that so that the world could see just how great Germany was at this point. Well, as time goes on, it becomes apparent to the rest of the world that nothing is going to satisfy Hitler. I've likened him in the past to a bully as he tries to expand and control more and more area. He is going to take on the persona of a bully. A lot of people within Europe look at how things are beginning to progress. They look at how the overall landscape of Europe had changed due to World War I. The continent was just different. And because of that, they said, we want to avoid, if possible, going to war again. We've already experienced one lost generation. We don't want to have another one 20 years down the road. And so many of them had started to pursue this belief of pacifism. Pacifism. Maybe you guys have heard that term before, but ultimately what that means is that you are against or opposed to war. Any and all forms of it, you are opposed to war. Many religious groups in particular are pacifist, but as you look at it, a lot in Europe said, we don't want to go fight again. Our boys are going to die. We don't want to do that. It's too costly. We want to avoid war at all possible options. So they instead move in a different direction. They start to pursue a policy that is known as appeasement. Appeasement. These basically are going to say, or this is going to say, that the nations of Europe, we're going to talk about England. You can see Hitler shaking the Prime Minister of England's hand there, a guy that is going to give in to him as well. But a lot of different heads of state are going to say, we're going to do what you're asking of us. In many, many aspects, in my mind, it's like a bully that beats up a kid on the lunch or playground and says, you're going to give me your lunch money. If it doesn't happen on the first day where the kid stands up to him and says, no, why would I? Of course, the very next day, the bully knows, easy target, we're going to keep coming back there. This idea of appeasement, it sounds good, and maybe it might work temporarily if somebody feels like, okay, I got at least a little bit of what I wanted, but ultimately it's going to be a very ineffective policy. One of the main areas that Hitler has begun to covet, you can see it just off the right side there. You can see Greater Germany, that's what Germany is, but there was this area called the Sudetenland. And even into that, this country that was known as Czechoslovakia, it doesn't exist today. Instead, it's Slovakia and the Czech Republic. There are two different countries that have now formed out of that landscape. But this was an area that was going to now be a very prime spot within the rest of Europe. Because of their alliances with the French and even the English, the people of Europe were relieved as a result of this. There's going to now be this, when Hitler says, we're not going to attack. That's something that we're going to kind of put off. That's not something that you have to worry about. As a result of this, there's going to now be an opportunity, even at this point, if there was going to be a olive branch extended, the English prime minister says to the Czech leadership, even if you have to surrender or give up some of your land, please do that. And he basically convinces them, yeah, we've got to give this up, even if it's going to be at a cost to you. Hopefully, this will now satiate Hitler so that we won't go to war. This is going to be our opportunity to maybe stop him in its tracks. As you might imagine, though, Hitler, like we talked about, isn't satisfied with the initial offering, this piece of land. Instead, he is going to grab more land than what had been agreed to originally. You can see that in that last slide. At this point, it seems like Hitler is going to start running roughshod, potentially over the rest of Europe. But in this moment where it seems like war is about to break out, these two very unlikely allies, and they're not really allies, but two very unlikely partners come together. You can see on the left there, Joe Stalin, who we've talked about in a great deal of depth, and then on the guy on the right, who is going to be the German foreign minister, they come together and they strike a deal that we are not going to fight. It seems like the Russians, or at this point the Soviets, would have been one of the first countries lining up to attack Germany. The rest of the world is taken off guard, saying, well, wait a second, don't the Russians or the Soviets hate Germany? Shouldn't this be one of the first areas that goes to war? But instead, they're going to set an agreement. And with this, you're going to see this area that had been kind of between them, an area that was going to be connected with Russia for sure, but an area that now was going to be an enticing target, which was Poland, was now going to be their main target of Germany, and Hitler was going to start rolling in there. And as we come back in the next session, we'll talk a little bit about how that's going to happen.